Boeing workers erupted in cheers when they heard the union had voted to strike.
We're just looking forward to bring back some kind of consideration from our CEOs, recognize who's building these planes out here on the floor.
Boeing workers erupted in cheers when they heard the union had voted to strike. We're just looking forward to bring back some kind of consideration from our CEOs. Recognize who's building these planes out here on the floor. Boeing's shop floor roared like a stadium. Yet the loudest signal was a quiet bookkeeping note, selling a lone 777-300ER for a fast $33 million. When a Titan pawns its wide bodies, it's not chasing pocket change. It's plotting its escape. Tariffs have turned every rivet into a luxury item, every buyer into a gamble, and the math no longer works. Today's strike is just smoke. The fire is a calculated retreat of American manufacturing, one bolt, one pay stub, one hometown at a time. The real question isn't whether Boeing survives, it's whether the nation wrapped around it can survive the vacuum it leaves behind. And if the backbone of aerospace is bending, what hope remains for the smaller shops that feed it? Boeing's sudden yard sale starts with a single headline most viewers scroll past. Ovation to sell Boeing 777-300ER, release $33 million cash. On the surface, it sounds routine. Leasing firm unloads an aging jet, pockets the profit, pays down debt. But look closer. Boeing isn't merely losing a customer. It's watching second-hand markets treat its wide-bodies like hot potatoes. When a lessor dumps a flagship 777 at a premium, that's a vote of no confidence in Boeing's future order book and a neon arrow pointing away from American assembly lines. Behind the for sale sign lurks another tremor. To cut certification costs, Boeing quietly asked the FAA for permission to sidestep lightning protection rules on the 737 MAX 7's yaw-damper system, then withdrew the request when the optics looked lethal. Translation: cash is so tight that the company flirted with trimming safety to save pennies per seat. Pair that with a strike costing $120 million a week and you see the pattern. Executives aren't solving problems. They're pawning assets and playing regulatory chicken while the clock ticks on 33,000 empty workstations. This is the first crack in a dam long praised as unbreakable. If financial quick fixes and safety shortcuts are showing up on the same balance sheet, imagine what the next quarter holds, especially when world buyers now bid in euros and yuan, not dollars, for replacements built far from Seattle. If you think American workers deserve better than being sacrificed for one-time cash bumps, smash that like button so this story isn't buried under corporate press releases. 6 months before the first picket sign hit the asphalt, Boeing's executive board quietly stamped approved on a 22-page document titled Phase Out Strategy, U.S. Manufacturing. The memo, shared only with senior finance and supply chain chiefs, reads like an evacuation briefing. Stage 1: freeze new hiring in Everett and Charleston. Stage 2: redirect avionics orders to factories in Ho Chi Minh City and Warsaw. Stage 3: by Q3 2025, move final assembly of select 737 subframes to a bonded zone in Mexico, outside the reach of Trump's retaliatory tariffs yet close enough for overnight rail into U.S. markets. The writers don't mince words. One line projects domestic loss margins exceeding 19% under current tariff load, untenable. Another warns that staying stateside would erode strategic liquidity needed to service Pentagon obligations. Translation: the balance sheet, not the stars and stripes, now decides where America's jets are born. And while workers were told to hold the line during wage talks, executives were already pricing out container space for wing spars across the Pacific. That duplicity is why union leaders call the strike a fight for existence rather than a pay dispute. It's not just about percentages on a paycheck. It's a battle over whether the next generation of aviation talent grows up in Washington or Manila. But if the memo feels like betrayal, wait until you see how Boeing tried to bend the very laws of physics and federal safety to keep the plan aloft. While the workers marched and the press focused on picket lines, Boeing played a quieter game, one involving electrical systems, legal exemptions, and weather. Specifically, lightning. The 737 MAX 7, already under scrutiny, required FAA approval to bypass an electrical resilience regulation tied to the SMYD, stall management yaw damper, a system critical to aircraft stability in storm conditions. Boeing claimed the hardware hadn't changed since the next-gen series, even though the exemption was meant for temporary safety updates, not long-term design shortcuts. Still, in 2023, the FAA gave in. Boeing had until 2027 to comply. For more years of loophole flying. But here's the twist. Just months later, Boeing withdrew the request. Not because it had fixed the issue, but because the optics were getting dangerous. With Congress eyeing aviation safety like a loaded weapon and public trust worn paper-thin after years of mechanical failures, the risk of headlines outweighed the cost savings. This wasn't a misstep. It was strategy. Delay compliance, dodge backlash, preserve liquidity. While machinists begged for fair wages on the factory floor, Boeing was asking regulators for a hall pass on lightning protection. Think about that. While workers fought to keep their homes, Boeing fought to avoid shielding its planes from actual storms. That's not cost-cutting. That's contempt disguised as compliance. And the next move would be even colder. As Boeing scrambled to patch leaks, Airbus sharpened its knives. France, once a key buyer of Boeing defense tech, announced it was reassessing procurement contracts. Japan quietly diverted a billion-dollar satellite deal to Europe. Even Canada, yes, the same Canada Trump once threatened with tariffs, began lobbying for Airbus exclusivity in North American defense agreements. And it wasn't just diplomacy. Airbus bundled its offers with tax incentives, political stability, and supply chain guarantees, everything Boeing couldn't promise under Trump's tariff chaos. While the U.S. imposed metal levies, Europe offered steel subsidies. While Boeing fought regulators, Airbus brought governments into its corner. Then came the gut punch. Mexico, Trump's old punching bag, offered Boeing a full tax exemption and infrastructure support if it relocated production south. What was once a symbol of American industrial dominance is now being courted by nations Trump tried to strong-arm. This is more than a global reshuffle. It's a reverse takeover, where allies stop trusting America's supply lines and start building alternatives. Boeing's silence hasn't gone unnoticed. Neither has Trump's. His strategy of isolation didn't just weaken relationships. It opened the door for rivals to step in, smile politely, and say, "We'll take it from here." When the world loses faith in your factories, it's not just orders that vanish. It's relevance. In cities like Everett, St. Louis, and Charleston, the silence is louder than the strike chants. Thousands of workers didn't just lose pay. They lost identity. These weren't gig jobs or side hustles. They were multi-decade trades, passed down like family heirlooms. Now, the same hands that built fighter jets and Dreamliners are left holding pink slips. Jack Raymond, a 28-year Boeing veteran, said it best, "They told us we were the backbone of the company. Now they're saying we cost too much to exist." Behind his words is an entire system collapsing. STEM apprentice programs canceled, trade schools pulling Boeing internships, technical colleges abandoning aviation pipelines altogether. The career ladder isn't broken, it's gone. Worse, small U.S. subcontractors in Alabama, Kansas, and Texas, businesses that survive off Boeing contracts, are quietly shutting down. No headlines, no bailouts, just lights turning off one by one. And while this happens, Boeing execs aren't walking the shop floors. They're flying out, literally. Retreating from the wreckage while telling the press they're exploring strategic adjustments. This isn't just an industrial contraction. It's cultural erasure. A slow-motion shutdown of America's ability to build, not just buy. And when the last skilled worker leaves the floor, we don't just lose jobs, we lose national self-respect. Boeing's collapse isn't just a headline, it's a warning. When 33,000 workers strike and leadership responds by shifting production overseas, that's not a negotiation, it's surrender. Trump's tariffs were supposed to protect American industry. Instead, they pushed our most iconic manufacturer into retreat, gave foreign rivals an opening, and left U.S. workers with nothing but silence. This wasn't an accident. It was a chain reaction, sparked by policy, ignored by leadership, and paid for by families who trusted both. If Boeing, with its contracts, cash, and legacy, can't survive in today's America, who can? Which company do you think will flee next? And will anyone stop at this time? Drop a comment below.